Hey everybody, so today we're going to continue talking about the fruits of the Spirit. Today we're going to take a look at faithfulness. So faithfulness is trusting and staying true to God even though things around us or maybe things in our life just feel like they're falling apart. But first we're going to take a look at the Israelites. And like many of us today, they battled with staying faithful to God. One would say their relationship with God was like a roller coaster, up and down, up and down. So even though the Israelites bared witness to everything God did through Moses to convince Pharaoh to let them go so they could be freed out of Egypt, every time they were faced with something that was hard or seemed impossible, they started to doubt God. In fact, their faithlessness led them to do distasteful and evil things in sight of the Lord, like worshiping false gods made out of gold and silver. And because of their faithlessness, they were not able to enter into the promised land that God had promised them. In fact, here it tells us in Deuteronomy chapter 1, verses 37 and 38. And this is Moses talking. Even with me, the Lord was angry on your account and said, you also should not go in there. It's talking about the promised land. And in verse 38, Joshua, the son of Nun, who stands before you, he shall enter. Encourage him, for he shall cause Israel to inherit it. So, and again, Moses wasn't able to enter the promised land because Moses allowed the Israelites' lack of faith to rob him of his peace. Because the story behind Moses not being able to enter the promised land is found in Numbers chapter 20. And they were in the desert and the Israelites were complaining about not having nothing to drink. They wanted water. And so Moses had took their complaint to God, which seems to, at that time, seemed to be an ongoing issue. And God specifically instructed Moses to speak to the rock and water will flow out. Well, Moses, again, you can tell from the context of the reading, if y'all guys want to read it for yourselves, you can tell from the context of reading that Moses was already fed up and irritated with the Israelites, that all he did was go and hit his staff to the rock. So because he allowed their faithlessness to rob him of his peace, he was disobedient to God. He didn't follow through on the instructions God gave him. So because of that, he wasn't able to enter the promised land. Joshua, on the other hand, it says Joshua was able to enter the promised land because the Bible describes him as being faithful to God. He served God wholeheartedly. So it's important to take note that our lack of faith doesn't just affect us; it affects those around. It affects those around us. So I want to encourage y'all, if you're battling with lack of faith in whatever situation it may be, remember Jesus told us that if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you tell the mountain to move and it shall be moved. Now, to give y'all guys a good example of faithfulness, which there's plenty to pick from, I want to take a look at the story of Elijah and the widow. So at this time, they were in the middle of a drought. And now the story of Elijah and the widow, this is after the 40 years in the desert. The Israelites already came into the promised land. But again, like I said, their relationship with God has been a roller coaster, up and down, up and down, up and down. So at this point, there is a great drought that came over the land. And I'm not talking about weeks, days, months. It was years of food. In fact, food sources were becoming scarce. And so God had told Elijah to go to the town of Zelophehad, and that there would be a widow there that he instructed to feed him. And so when Elijah went, he seen her and he was like, he had asked her, oh, can you bring me a drink of water? And then so she went to go get him a drink of water. And then before she could leave, he had said, also, can you bring me a loaf of bread? And she said, surely as God is my witness, I only have enough to feed my son and myself. And then we're going to die. You know, she just had enough for one meal. Well, Elijah told her, go and do as I instruct, and you and your son will not run out of food. Your oil and your flour will not run dry, you know, till the drought's over. And so she did as Elijah instructed, and as he said, and what he said came true. She never ran out of flour. She never ran out of oil. She had enough to feed herself, Elijah, and her son. Now, can you imagine the amount of faith? Can you imagine the amount of faith that took the stranger that just came to you, right? You go and you make them what is your last source of food for you and your son to give it to him. Now, I don't want to sell faith. I don't want to be like, oh, well, if you do this, this is going to happen. No, I want to get that false sense. Faithfulness cannot be sold. You cannot buy faithfulness. Faithfulness it comes from in here. It comes from in the heart. It's truly battling those voices that come to us in hard times or sad times or whatever it may be. It's truly battling those voices, truly believing that everything's going to be okay no matter the situation. To finish up the story of Elijah and the widow, shortly after the widow's son had became struck with the illness to the point where he stopped breathing. Now, can you imagine, you had enough faith, right, to go and give this guy the last bit of your food, and God delivered on his promise where you did not run out of food, right? But then your son gets struck with the illness, right? He stops breathing. Just put yourself in that woman's shoes for a minute. I know me myself, I would have a whole lot of questions like, man, what is going on? What is this? You start to ask yourself, I thought I'm doing everything right. Like, what is going on? So Elijah took the boy to his room and laid him in his bed, and he cried out to the Lord, like many of us would. Lord, basically, what are you doing? And it tells us that Elijah threw himself on the boy 3 times, crying out to the Lord, and the Lord gave the boy his life back. So not only did the widow show faith in the beginning of the story by giving Elijah food before she made food for her and her son, but Elijah showed faith in that moment that it seemed like God had felt them both, right? And there are going to be times in our life where it may feel like God has failed us both. But I want to encourage you again to keep that faith, to keep fighting, and you're not in it alone. Please feel free, if there's anything you need prayer just about, hit me in Messenger, whatever it is. I love to pray for whatever it may be, believing with you in faith, speaking with you in faith, that whatever it is, God's will, let it be done. So that's it for today, folks. Remember, Jesus loves you. I love you. Peace.